Hey, Peter from the future here. I'm not sure really what happened to my microphone, but it sounds kind of bad. Sorry about that. I tried to fix it. Hopefully next week it'll be better. Enjoy the show.
Recorded live at Talks and Tasting Studios, it's the Clerical Errors Podcast, the podcast that shows you what's behind the collar. Let's go.
From the Talks and Tasting Studio, this is Bollhagen.
This is Berg.
This is Vicar.
And Peter's here.
Hey, Pete.
Kind of feels like we just did this.
Yeah, I know, right?
It's kind of strange. You got your button ready, by the way? All right. If you're wondering
Welcome to the Clerical Errors Podcast, the show that shows you what's behind the collar.
Thank you, Peter.
We're recording this immediately after ending the previous episode because we just can't shut Berg up, and he has to keep going on his current topic.
Yep. That's the problem when you give a professional speaker a mic.
So, if you're wanting an update on the dog, nothing's changed since our last episode.
What's the dog's name again?
Well, that depends whether I get help from the Clerical Errors Army posting on the Facebook that Norman is a great name for a dog.
And the email, and especially the Twitter.
Well, the thing is, the Facebook is public, so she can actually...
But isn't Twitter public too?
Is it? I don't know.
You're going to have to post a picture of Norman on the Facebook on Sunday.
So what makes this
hopefully
dog look
you've
like...
done that.
What does this dog... What about this dog makes him look like a Norman?
Well, one, he is kind of lazy. Doesn't do much. That's two. It's a kind of a dude because I get tired of the Sparkies. The typical dog name.
You could name him like what Luther named his little dog, Tüpfel, which means little fool.
Anyways, so
before we get into Berg's back into Berg's topic, we should probably hit a couple of standard podcasts. We should probably hit the text for the day, but I wanted to talk about something. So Bert's not here today, and no flame to him. Busy schedules. He lives pretty far away.
yes,
no big deal. He can't.
No flame or shade.
No shade, right? But in our text conversation, I think at least half, maybe more, of his texts contain one thing. Do you guys know what that is?
What is it?
He ends most of his messages with 3 dots. 3 periods.
Mm-hmm.
As though he is maybe considering whether or not he's going to finish his sentence, but it's always the end of the sentence.
I have to look this up now.
I'm looking right now. When he does use punctuation, it's frequent. I'm not sure there's a whole bunch. Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
I mean
it's true. I never would have thought that.
Granted, a couple of the examples are quotes. So,
But he uses ...
Yeah.
So now, in a casual conversation with you men, what kind of tone would you read that in? If somebody says like, "Hey, I had a really fun time last night." ...
But
Yeah.
Yeah, you're waiting for the rest of the message.
The rest of the message, right? Or something like, "I can't make it. I have a funeral coming up." ...
Maybe
What does
it's
that kind of feel
maybe
like?
instead of ... it's ... Read it that way once. Read the same text that way. See.
Would we have rather have that sentence punctuated with an exclamation point?
So read it and I'll see if it works.
"I can't make it. I have a funeral coming up." ...
Give me another example.
better than a question mark. I can't make it today. I have a funeral coming up.
Oh.
Not able to be there, but keep me posted for next week. I think
It does fit with Bert's personality, though.
It's either the sentence isn't finished, or you're implying that you should know how it ends, right?
Could he possibly just be heavy-handed with his use of a period and stuck button syndrome?
Berg isn't heavy-handed about anything, though.
Okay.
It's like if I was to get a message from my mom back when I was living at home that said, "Hey, we'll be ready to go as soon as I get done doing the dishes." ... What is that implying?
You better be there.
That's implying that I should have done the dishes.
Oh, okay.
Let's help Bert out. He's not here, but we can help him. So what kind of pitfalls could he run into if he keeps doing this?
What kind of messages?
I would. I can meet you at the funeral home. ...
Man, texting etiquette is really difficult. I will say that.
It can be. Millennial advice. Not I'm technically a millennial. Keep the punctuation down.
Yes.
You can use commas, but you almost never use periods. Unless you're completing a sentence and starting a new one.
It's almost as if the period is just kind of like, I don't know how to explain it.
So the period, if it's just one sentence in a message and you end it with a period, it's got some force. It's got some finality to it.
Yeah.
Although I like the lazy thing Berg does where it just says liked comment.
That's another one that we could talk about. Berg has an iPhone and the rest of us don't. So when Berg likes a comment, and maybe he doesn't know this, when Berg
I don't know this.
likes any of our messages, instead of just having like a thumbs up like you might think, all of us get another text from Berg that says liked, quote, and then the message he liked.
And I was thinking, like, that's a lot of work to type in liked and then...
All for you, Bollhagen. All for you.
I'm trying to find a good example here. It was something. It's pretty common that'll be like, we'll set a time. We'll say, Tuesday morning at 9:30, and then we'll just get another message. Berg liked Tuesday morning at 9:30.
You didn't even know that, did you?
I didn't.
Yeah.
The ones that I don't know, it kind of flusters me a little bit is when people will write like single letters, like K. I don't know. I just don't like that.
That is a holdover from T9 texting. You'll find most younger people will actually type in full words and decent enough strings of words that you could make a sentence. In fact, you'll find the older people that got used to the T9 texting.
You mean texting with the new numbers?
Texting with the numbers, yeah.
Yes.
That they are actually terrible to text because they still use all that old stuff even though they have a full keyboard in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know Norman texts with K9.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'll admit, if you want to see some really interesting text messaging, my mother-in-law was a nurse, so she'll use nursing shorthand every so often too.
Oh.
On top of
the
T9 style, so it gets...
So what is nursing shorthand?
Like the abbreviations they'll use in like their reporting. So there'll be like these 2 and 3 letter codes that mean stuff.
Mm-hmm. Can you give an example?
I can't because I don't know.
Actually, I've seen some of this, like AKHAPSEIE means in nursing another kid has a pumpkin seed in his ear.
Oh, yes, of course.
Yeah.
That one comes out quite a lot.
Yeah.
So basically, in summary, when texting, keep your punctuation down to a minimum. Don't end your message with a period unless you're angry or it is the end of the conversation you have decreed.
I'm actually learning some new stuff.
Commas are fine.
Mm-hmm.
And don't end your message with 3 periods at the end of the message unless you want to incite fear and worry into the recipient.
So what about, there are specific rules about emojis?
Emojis are fine in casual settings. Don't send an emoji to your boss.
Because I don't know, maybe should men over the age of 45 be using emojis?
It's fine if it's to your family or to a friend.
Actually,
think
the
it's
one
fine.
I think I send emojis to is my wife.
Yeah.
As long as they make sense. I mean,
Well,
Emoji
moving on.
emojis are more fun when they don't make sense.
thumbs up or like a beer if we're gonna
Yeah,
party
yeah.
or
There actually, I must admit there are times where I can't find the emoji on my phone, so I will type thumbs up.
Well, if you're using the right keyboard, sometimes it'll pop it in anyway.
or snow. That's one nice thing. You can type in snow or baby, and it'll give you an emoji. It's awesome.
There should be a
So anyway, sorry, I just had to get that off my chest.
Yeah,
I'm
I get
sorry,
off topic.
Bert's not here to defend himself, but hopefully we've enlightened you, Bert. Assuming you still listen to the podcast when when you're not on it.
Yeah.
You know he's gonna end up ending every single message that way now.
Oh, I sure hope not.
I hope so. Man.
Yeah, we wish we were here, Bert. ...
Dot.
All right, what
All right,
what
let's get to the text.
what are we preaching on?
Okay, sixth Sunday of Easter, that would be John 16:23 to 30, or do you want me to go all the way to 33?
It's just an extra 3 verses.
So throw in the extra 3. In that day you will ask, this is Jesus speaking, in that day you will ask nothing of me. Truly, truly, I say to you, whatever you ask of the Father in my name, he will give it to you. Until now you have asked nothing in my name. Ask and you will receive, that your joy may be full. I have said these things to you in figures of speech. The hour is coming when I will no longer speak to you in figures of speech, but will tell you plainly about the Father. In that day you will ask in my name, and I do not say that I will ask the Father on your behalf, for the Father himself loves you, because you have loved me and have believed that I came from God. I came from the Father and have come into the world, and now I am leaving the world and going to the Father. His disciples said, Ah, now you are speaking plainly and not using figures of speech. Now we know that you know all things and do not need anyone to question you. This is why we believe that you came from God. Jesus answered them, Do you now believe? Behold, the hour is coming. Indeed, it has come when you will be scattered, each to his own home, and will leave me alone. Yet I am not alone, for the Father is with me. I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart, I have overcome the world.
I do like when you get a glimpse into the disciples and how funny they are. Because in this one, they're like, now we know, we understand all things. When is this, Vicar?
This would be, literally, the next section says the high priestly prayer, and then the next chapter after that is the betrayal and arrest of Jesus. So this is in the garden.
Right. They're like, all right, we got this now.
And you can,
Womp, womp, womp,
and you can all but
womp.
hear, Jesus' hand against his forehead and the exasperation as like, now, finally? It's been 3 years, guys.
Yeah, stay tuned, disciples. Things are going to change here pretty soon.
It's kind of like in Luke where Jesus is like, look, bring 2 swords along, bring your money purse. And they're like, well, we got 2 swords. You can just hear Jesus sighing and being like, okay, it's enough.
Yeah.
But John's gospel is amazing this way because Jesus uses a lot of, and the word here is figurative language. He does this in John chapter 2, where he talks about the temple. And really the temple is his body. In John chapter 3 with the new birth, John chapter 4 with the living water, John chapter 6 with my flesh is true meat and my blood is true drink. It just kind of keeps going through. Jesus uses a lot of language, figurative language in the Gospel of John, where people have no idea what he is. What he's even saying. And it's interesting because this is not how we teach vicars.
Yes, that's true.
And so I do think it's interesting
Because there have been times where vicars say, you're going to laugh at this, right? Well, where they say, okay, Bollhagen said this, but what is he really trying to say? They like try to read into my deeper thoughts on things.
Yeah, the trick is to realize that it's not a deeper thought.
No, what you see is what you get, man.
And the interesting thing about the way that Jesus teaches, it's very different than how we teach. When we teach very straightforward. We kind of give people the answer. Where Jesus kind of takes them on a journey. And he spends a lot of time kind of leading them through this. And so when he talks about the new birth, Nicodemus is like, well, that's stupid. What am I going to do? Climb back into my mom's womb? And
it's done in such a way where at the time it doesn't make sense. Can we talk about this with Jesus being the fulfillment of prophecy and understanding the Old Testament? It's kind of like the end of a movie where something happens and all those unimportant things in the movie that you didn't understand like that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And I think it's part of that too, as Jesus teaches all these things that when the death and resurrection then hits, and then he goes back and shows, this is what I meant, this is what I meant, then all the pieces then come together.
It's just funny, like, we don't teach like Jesus does.
No.
And I wonder if that's a failing on our part, just because we've never been really taught to teach that way, or if we're just afraid our people won't take the journey with us. Because I think that is a big deal, is that we want people to take this journey with us, because once they do that, once they engage, it's going to stick with them a lot longer than if we just simply give them the answers.
I would say this. What Jesus could do, and he expresses it's in the Gospels. This is expressed all the time, where it says Jesus understanding what they were thinking. He knew in what was in their hearts. He knew kind of their thoughts, and so he had that advantage of then being able to teach in a way where he knew what they were thinking. And I don't know. I don't think it was necessarily. Was it a supernatural thinking, or was it just?
I was about to ask that same question. Do you think that all of this Jesus teaching and the disciples not getting it until after the resurrection, is that a supernatural thing, or is that just it didn't make any sense, and so of course they didn't get it?
I mean, in part, yes. I think it depends on what context you're talking about. So, like in the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus tells them to beware the leaven of the Pharisees and the Herodians. And the disciples say, Jesus is mad because we didn't bring any bread along. And Jesus is like, no, that's stupid. Your hearts are hard. And it says in the text that their hearts were hardened. I think this actually relates very well to the text that came before, that Jesus said, I have many things to tell you, but you are not ready for them, right? Mm-hmm. And this is one of the beautiful things that Jesus does throughout, right? He, in John 3, he takes Nicodemus through it. In John 4, he takes the Samaritan woman, where when he says, go call your husband, we think, oh, well, that's kind of a non sequitur. Why, you're talking about living water. Well, here he's showing that he's a prophet, and that if he's a prophet, they're really not talking about literal water. They're talking about something different. Mm-hmm. And this is when it all switches to like worship. Same thing in John chapter 6, where Jesus at the beginning of his discourse says, look, those who believe in me shall never hunger, and those who come to me shall never thirst. It's a complete dialogue about faith. And yet, people don't get it, right? And they're still thinking in this very Capernetic sort of way that, oh, well, Jesus is going to slice off a piece of his flesh and give it to us to eat.
What does Capernetic mean?
Since this dialogue took place in Capernaum, we in our confessions we talk about it as Capernetic eating, and this is one of the things that this is actually a supernatural eating and not some sort of Thestian banquet.
But to get back to your question then about his teaching, I will say that along that note then, a big part of teaching and preaching is really trying to figure out what people are thinking and struggling with.
And I just know, like, in seminary, when we had professors who asked you the question and forced you to struggle with it, those are the things that I remember the most. And sometimes I wonder if our teaching and preaching would be better if we took people more on this journey, if we forced them to struggle with it a little bit more, so that way they made these answers their own.
I have done it, preach in such a way where I build them up in a way of what the, oh yeah, that's, and then I basically said everything I said was just wrong.
Well,
you know what I mean? I don't know if I've done that. Kind of.
There's been a couple things minorly, yeah, where it's maybe, oh look, we could take it this way, but that's not the right way to go. Here's the right way.
Well, and I think we get so afraid that, well, people aren't going to listen. People aren't going to stay with us and with Jesus, it was the same way. Nicodemus doesn't get it until after Jesus' death. The Samaritan woman did, but she was willing to stick by him and continue to learn. The people at Capernaum, the Jews who are mad about talking about his flesh being true meat and his blood being true drink, I mean, they all leave, right? So this isn't, I don't know. Sometimes I wonder if that isn't a risk we shouldn't take, that it's good for people to be uncomfortable. It's good for people to struggle a little bit in the faith.
Do you know what? I just realized Bert's genius. Isn't that exactly what he's been doing?
This is what he's doing with the text message.
It's all come together now.
See?
We just are hard of heart and do not understand him.
Right. We do not understand the meaning of the periods.
And he probably is hitting himself in the forehead. You guys, you don't understand.
Mm-hmm. I need to speak plainly with you. It's interesting because, usually we go from plain speaking to figurative, but Jesus does it the opposite. He goes from figurative to plain speaking in his ministry. So sometimes I wonder if that isn't, it would be hard to do. And I think you'd have to be a good teacher to do it. But
an example of this where I've noticed, as far as a plain speaking where it's kind of helpful, is there have been times where a vicar's working on a sermon, and I'll say, well, what are you trying to say in this part of the sermon? And they'll tell me. And I said, why didn't you just say it like that?
Right.
Well, what I was trying to say is, okay, you just told me in a nice, easy way that I understand. But in the sermon...
Yeah, this is gobbledygook. But it's great because Jesus speaks plainly to them, and then they kind of get all like, oh, now you're speaking plainly, and we believe this. And then Jesus is like, yeah, you are all going to run away.
So confident.
But I
identify with those dudes.
Yeah, I hear you. Well, and, another thing to touch on in this gospel reading is all of the prayer promises that God gives. In that day you will ask me nothing, which is interesting because if you read the Old Testament, the people are always going to Moses or to one of the leaders to pray for them. But here, Jesus is like, look, you can pray to the Father. Whatever you ask the Father in my name, that is in faith, he will give you. I mean, oftentimes we try to limit prayer, but these are powerful promises that God will give us what we ask for. He's not going to give us something evil. He's not going to give us something painful. But I don't know if we actually believe this.
What do you mean by that?
If we actually believe that God would give us what we ask for, we would pray a lot more than what we do.
Right. And I think I mentioned this before on a podcast. I find myself in prayer, if someone's in the hospital, help us accept your will more than, heal this dude.
Right. Or Hezekiah. Hezekiah got 15 years more of life because he prayed. So, So
Berg, do you consider yourself a prayer warrior?
Actually, what has helped me pray more has been my children.
Mm-hmm. Because that's the beauty of love, is you find yourself willing to do things more for someone else that you wouldn't do for yourself.
Right. And this is why, too, it's very important to have the commandments, because we need to be commanded to pray. We do, because all these promises are great, but we just don't take advantage of them.
Right.
We don't. We actually have to kill the old Adam, the old flesh, because prayer is very powerful, because God hears our prayer. He promises these things. So it's not like, and don't, like, here's a big pet peeve of mine. Don't ever say on Facebook, well, sending prayers your way. You've seen that, right?
Sure.
It's so dumb. No, you're praying to the Father. You're praying to the Father. This isn't like good vibrations, man.
I just do the praying hands.
Would a better way to say it be praying on your behalf?
Yeah, praying on your behalf, or I'm praying to God for you. Rather than sending prayers your way. It's like, yeah, what do I want your spittle coming towards me for?
I wonder if everyone has ever misunderstood the praying hands emoji. Like, I just want you all to know I'm going through a really difficult time, ... And then someone says, why does this person give me a high five?
Nice. ... All right,
right.
should we continue with our discussion from last time?
Well, before we do that, poor Peter hasn't had to play a single intro yet. Okay, and I know the audience is dying for a quick update.
Okay.
Of Bollhagen's book club. Peter, play the intro.
It's book time with Bollhagen.
That's right.
So, if you don't remember, and this will be quick because you've got some important stuff to do because you're going through some heavy material, as am I.
Indeed.
Okay. If you want to join this book club, Vicar, do you remember which book I am reading?
I'll admit the title is escaping me, but it is the autobiography of Mike Lindell, the creator of My Pillow.
That's right.
I know. I feel really bad forgetting the title because it was pretty. Yeah. What are the odds from crack addict to CEO? Thank you, producer.
So just a quick update of where I am in the book. So he starts getting into alcohol in high school. His drink of choice is peppermint schnapps. He also begins a gambling habit, and he mentions and complains a little about his ADHD. Oh, get over yourself. I
thought you were going to say hashtag the struggle is real.
And then he works at a drive-in. He gets in a car accident where his car hits a giant oak tree. He survives. He goes to college for, he says, 5 minutes. He gets a cup of coffee in college. And then he went to California, stopped by on his way to California with a friend in Las Vegas, where he starts his gambling a little bit more seriously. He finds the thrill and the joy of gambling. He then moves to a trailer park where he starts to open a personal casino. And at some point, he finds the joy of bookies, where he starts betting on sports, finds himself $12,000 in the hole. He goes to a loan officer to loan him money for the $12,000. And then he see where are my notes here. And at that point, then he gets out of that, and a couple of years later, he finds himself, and a mafia-type person comes and leaves him a note that he owes this money. And he's working at a grocery store, so if like some bookie guy wanting his money comes, someone would call on the phone, a cell phone for Mike on line 3. That meant someone was there to kill him. And that is where I am at. So haven't quite gotten to the uphill climb yet. It jumped around a little less, okay, but he's on this downward spiral.
Yeah, it seems like it. Oofda.
So he's as of right now. He has moved back, and he owes like $25,000 to someone, and that's where I'm at so far. Any questions?
It sounds like he just needs to work harder.
That's right. He needs a Protestant work ethic.
Oofda.
So, the section I read was much less cocaine-y.
Well, that's good. Is he still doing cocaine during those times, or is it?
I don't think he's
mostly
there yet.
Pre-cocaine.
This is
Oh, this is pre-cocaine.
This is the pre-coke era.
Oh yeah, right. We switched channels again, didn't we?
Yeah, he there's a lot of flashbacks. Remember, so.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, it will be interesting to see how it turns around.
But I do think that if we ever get into a movie production wing of Clerical Errors, if we get enough subscribers for that, I think this will be our first movie project.
I think you should have former vicars playing the parts,
Oh,
especially the ones at the bar.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, Lefty and Popeye and
Yeah. So yeah, who could we get to play Mike Lindell?
Well, what you could do is recruit some of your sons to play the young Michael Lindell, and then you could play the older version.
I know who could play it. Peter, could you somehow put on the screen for them the picture of Jonah with a mustache?
ooh, that's tough. But you're right.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Is it real? It's
No.
fake, right?
No, it's fake. Yeah,
Okay.
that's what I want to go in the they have the senior spotlight in the newspaper. That's what I.
I wonder if he would be down for that. Because
would
I
be
would have been
awesome.
down. Well, anyway, so Vicar, let's get back into Berg's topic here. Can you give us a short refresher as to what we talked about last week?
I'll give my best. So associate producer Hannah had sent us an email, particularly aimed at Berg. She had been reading a book about, I think, was it work ethic or
Overworking.
Yeah, overworking. Yeah, that's not the right one. But yeah, on overworking, and Berg very graciously did a whole lot of research on this because the author of the book was quoting from Luther.
And in a way that she
kind
didn't
of-
really understand
yeah.
Luther's.
She maybe saw a quote on the Wikipedia page from the look of it.
But Berg took the whole discussion to the next level.
Yeah, he actually did proper research and was looking at how our concept, at least in America, of the work ethic has been messed up, disjointed from its Christian roots, and probably is killing us.
And we talked about how capitalism does not work without faith.
Right. And maybe sometime, too, because Weber really gets into, and talks about Calvinism as kind of being the fermenting ground of this capitalistic spirit. So maybe someday I can put together a Puritan work ethic sort of deal and see how right some of these things are. And how our perceptions of the Puritans, because the Puritans have gotten kind of a bad rap. And so we might do that at some point in the future, in a future episode. So, but we did talk a little bit about Luther and kind of what his thoughts are. We had a few quotes from him. I wanted to read a few more quotes just to show about the frugality and the hard work, where he actually says, "I did nothing." So yeah. And just kind of where this Berufsleben, this calling in life, where that really comes up. And really the way that, because we use this word vocation a lot.
Does Berufsleben basically mean station in life?
Beruf means call.
Okay.
So it'd be like vocation. Okay. And so this sort of calling, what does that mean? I think we use the word vocation a lot in modern Lutheranism, but I think we actually have to know what kind of calling we're talking about. There is the calling to the Christian faith, which is the one call we all have in common. Mm-hmm. There are calls to being mothers and fathers, pastors or political leaders or magistrates.
So, for example, when people think, we as pastors encounter this all the time, where people ask, well, when did you feel called? Or, as though there was some sort of a red phone.
Right.
Kind of like Neo at the beginning of Matrix, and then we get a phone sent to our workstation.
And this actually comes from Calvinism. They would make a distinction between the inward call and the outward call. Now, this is a problem because I don't think it's very biblical. I think it's actually anti-biblical. I think we should talk about this the way that the Bible talks about it. To desire to be a bishop is a good thing. But not everyone who desires to be a bishop can be a bishop or an overseer. This is why if you fail your seminary classes, Vicar, you're not going to get called.
No.
And you're not called. Doesn't matter how you feel about it. You might desire that, and that desire is good, but if you can't cut the mustard,
Right.
It's kind of like the whole baptism argument. When a Baptist asks a Lutheran, when were you saved? And they'll say, well, when I was baptized. If they ask a pastor, when were you called? A Baptist would say, well, I was
5 years old and I was sitting in church and
right,
et cetera, et cetera. But that's,
or, I was at Sneaky Pete's
yeah.
with Cooter and Hangman.
And no mind. So you're really having fun over there. I like it.
Yeah.
So
That's what it's all about, man.
But yeah, and this is why when we talk about these things, we probably should talk about them in a biblical sense. Having a desire to be a pastor is a great thing, but actually being called, and this is why then the pastoral epistles get into all the qualifications. If you don't meet those qualifications, you can't be a pastor.
Because if you focus on the inward call and someone believes that's true, there in their mind is, how can you argue with God?
Yeah, as if their feelings are God.
Right. At the same time, we do say that, if it's a divine call.
It'd be as silly as if I said to Jonah, I feel like I'm your dad. So you're going to come live with me and I'm going to tell you what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And what would your response to that be?
To me,
if I said to Jonah,
if you said it,
yeah,
I would say you guys don't look alike.
I say, what? You're arguing with God?
I would send you a text with 3 dots at the end of it.
But that's how ridiculous this is, right?
By the way, that sounds like how seminarians pick up girls is, I think you should be my wife.
But anyway, you're not a pastor till you're called, just like you're not a father until you're a father.
Right.
And you're not a husband until that wedding day.
In the Bible, really, when you talk about the call, and I was going to talk about this sometime, we'll just talk about it now. The New Testament, when it talks about the placing of pastors or the calling of pastors, it has less to do with actually how you do it. It's more deals with the qualifications of that person.
Exactly. So, for example, a guy like David Henkel never went to seminary. He was trained by, I believe, his father, and he was not actually a pastor for a long time, and yet they had it set up where he could preach. I don't know if you've learned anything about David Henkel, Tennessee Synod.
Name's vaguely familiar, but I don't have any details.
He and his family were the first ones to have an English translation of the Book of Concord.
Okay.
So, very important guy. An apprenticeship worked for those guys for how a pastor was trained. Seminary, well, there really weren't any seminaries, or if there were, and there were, but it was much more difficult or of a false confession. Which is why when the Saxons came over, one of the groups that formed the Missouri Synod, when they came to Perry County, Missouri, one of the first things they did was start up a school system not only elementary, but also for high school and seminary. So that way they would always have...
Because they had to bring their pastors over from Germany.
Yes, and at that point, they thought that Germany was a lost cause, so they had to train their own. Now, their way of educating pastors is much different than how you and I were educated. There were pastors about 60, 50 years ago, they actually left home at 7th grade.
Mm-hmm.
And you went to a boarding school. You went to a Lutheran high school, and you learned your languages, and then you went to the senior college, and then you went to seminary. Which is very different than how the three of us here have been trained.
And the senior college was basically seminary level.
Yes, and so once you came out, you knew German, Greek, Hebrew, and Latin. And when you got to seminary, some of the classes were in Latin yet, especially the dogmatics classes. So, and this persisted even until about the 1930s. So, the way in which we train clergy has changed a lot over the years, and our education system was very high.
And it's in the process of changing now, too.
Yes. And it might get to the point where we don't have seminaries, and so the question is how are we going to make sure that our congregations have pastors if there are no seminaries and if you and I go to jail and or are killed?
Right.
And this is why it's always good not to get too attached to the forms, because it might mean that a pious man from the congregation who fits the qualifications of a pastor might, out of necessity, have to step into the pastoral role and be called by the congregation and have hands laid on him, and he's the pastor.
But for order's sake, that's why we're part of a synod.
Yes.
Is to as best we can, have a system where we know pastors have been trained and can receive a call.
Yeah. Sometimes I wonder.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wonder if circuits shouldn't have theological interviews. Just because there is. We should have another layer of protection for congregations.
But let's get back to your reading here.
All right. So Luther talks a lot about the call, and in his large catechism, which I believe you should all go and read because it's amazing. At the conclusion of the first part after the 10 Commandments, Luther says this. He says, I am of the opinion, indeed, that here one will find his hands full and will have enough to do to observe these, namely meekness, patience, and love toward enemies, chastity, kindness, etc., and what such virtues imply. So he's saying here that you have enough good works to do by just following the 10 Commandments. But such works are not of value and make no display in the eyes of the world. For they are not peculiar and conceited works, and restricted to particular times, places, rites, and customs, but are common, everyday, domestic works which one neighbor can practice toward another. Therefore, they are not of high esteem. So, what do people really want? They want the big, flashy works. They want the big conventions, and they want the millions of dollars given to some poor kids in Africa, rather than actually buckling down and doing your God-given works here among your neighbors. And this is why they're not held in high esteem, because they seem common to us. But the other works, that is not from the 10 Commandments, cause people to open their eyes and ears wide, and men aid to this effect by the great display, expense, and magnificent buildings with which they adorn them, so that everything shines and glitters. There they waft incense, they sing and ring bells, they light tapers and candles, so that nothing else can be seen or heard. For when a priest stands there in the surplice embroidered with gilt, or a layman continues all day upon his knees in church, that is regarded as a most precious work which no one can sufficiently praise. But when a poor girl tends a little child, and faithfully does what she is told, that is considered nothing. For else what should monks and nuns seek in their cloisters? So here we have this beautiful, showing of what it actually means. That Luther's whole point here is that your calling and station in life, according to the 10 Commandments is more pleasing to God than all of these beautiful church buildings or, praying in church all day. And we actually have one of those in Iowa, and you know what I'm thinking of, right?
Yes, the
Grotto of the Redemption, right? Mm-hmm. That this guy spent how many years? He spent his whole life, his whole ministry there building this grotto to the Virgin Mary, which it's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
People come
Unique.
from all over to see it. But I tell you that his work in doing that is nothing compared to the mom changing her son's dirty diapers. That when you defend your neighbor's reputation in public and you forget about it, that is worth more than that grotto.
It's kind of like how the same goes when you're teaching true theology. It's not gonna make a lot of waves. It's not new and inventive.
Yeah, I mean, it's not sexy,
right?
Like people talk about today. People don't get, it's not flash and bang, but that's what people want. Yeah, they look at our services and say, "Oh, they're just it's just boring, and we're not going to listen to them anymore." But nevertheless, this is where the real work happens. Now, I really wanted to smash this woman's, her name was Celeste Headley's claim that Luther believed that idleness should be enjoyed only after death, which is a flat-out lie. So, this is from Luther's second sermon, March 10th, 1522, the Monday after Invocavit, which is the first Sunday in Lent. He says here, "Take myself as an example. I opposed indulgences in all the papists, but never with force. I simply taught, preached, and wrote God's word. Otherwise, I did nothing. And while I slapped or drank Wittenberg beer with my friends Philip and Amsdorf, the word so greatly weakened the papacy that no prince or emperor ever inflicted such losses upon it. I did nothing, the word did everything. Had I desired to foment trouble, I could have brought great bloodshed upon Germany. Indeed, I could have started such a game that even the emperor would not have been safe. But what would it have been? Mere fool's play. I did nothing, I let the word do its work. What do you suppose is Satan's thought when one tries to do the thing by kicking up a row? He sits back in hell and thinks, oh, what a fine game the poor fools are up to now. But when we spread the word alone and let it alone do the work, that distresses him. For it is almighty and takes captive the hearts, and when the hearts are captured, the work will fall of itself." So, once again, Luther's like, I did what I was supposed to do. I went and I drank beer with my buddies. I went to bed, and the word did all the work. This is diametrically opposed to what Franklin says. Franklin says you shouldn't even go to the bar.
That's what. Yeah, you're right.
And we talked about that before. And here Luther is like, no, idleness, and maybe not so much idleness, but simple enjoyment of life is such a big thing in Luther's writing. We see here, and no doubt he worked very hard, but he never was worried about his hard work. What he did, he was never anxious about it. And I think that's the thing is so many pastors today are inflicted with this demonic sort of spirit of capitalism that, well, if I go on vacation, the church is going to fall apart. Mm-hmm. I can never stop working. I can never stop doing it. It's like God will preserve his church. Like, take comfort in it. It's great.
And when you think of the Old Testament and how God said, remember, how do you remember him? By resting.
By resting. And we'll get into that next part on what leisure. What should leisure look like? And one of the great sins of the day is Akadia, right? The noonday devil.
Okay.
So
you want to get into that now, or you got some more?
But so we can get into that third thing, leisure, the basis of culture. Okay, what is leisure? Leisure is not idleness, and it's not non-activity like watching Netflix. Okay, leisure is a mental and spiritual attitude. It is a receptive attitude of the mind. It is a contemplative attitude. And Luther touches on this, on what leisure should actually be. in the third commandment. He says, "How then does such sanctification take place? Not in this manner, that with folded hands we sit behind the stove and do no rough external work, or deck ourselves with a wreath and put on our best clothes, but as has been said, that we occupy ourselves with God's word and exercise ourselves therein. And indeed, we Christians ought always to keep such a holy day and be occupied with nothing but holy things. That is, daily be engaged upon God's word and carry it in our hearts and on our lips. But as has been said, since we do not at all times have leisure, we must devote several hours a week for the sake of the young, or at least a day for the sake of the entire multitude, to being concerned about this alone, and especially urge the 10 Commandments, the Creed, and the Lord's Prayer, and thus direct our whole life and being according to God's word." So here we see that leisure is not just sitting behind the stove or ordering takeout, or as the Reformed used to do, where they wouldn't even mow their grass on Sundays, or get into the planter. It is so legalistic. It is so stupid. So I've got an uncle, a great uncle, who lives in Minnesota, and he worked for these Calvinistic farmers. And they would not work on Sundays. So they would stop at 11:59 on Saturday night.
Mm-hmm.
And then they would start up right again at 12:01 Monday morning. And it's like, this is not what this commandment is talking about. Leisure is not just simply, or think of Little House on the Prairie. Laura Ingalls Wilder talks about, sitting and playing with their dolls quietly, and they can't really do much of anything with that. But it's all legalism. It's all external stuff. What is true leisure? It's meditating upon God's word. It's being occupied with God's word. And you have to actually stop what you're doing to think about it.
And Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest."
Right. Or the other side of it too is Mary and Martha. Martha actually was leisurely. She sat at Jesus' feet and listened to what he said. And this is why the festival, a feast day, is the highest form of leisure. And this is why I just so regret that we got rid of all of the feast days during the week and everything else. I mean, the one thing that this Celeste Headley brings up, and I think it's right, that we work more than medieval peasants. They only worked about half of the year with all of their feast days and everything else. Okay. So that's huge. We do have a few feast days, and we can think of these. One of them is
one of the reasons.
Feast days.
Thanksgiving,
right? Christmas, Easter, right? These are feast days. These are holidays, and that word holiday, and everyone's like, people say happy holidays. Well, I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say Merry Christmas. Holiday just means holy day. Come on. Right?
Right.
That's what it means. So I'm going to say happy holidays all the time because I love holy days. And what do we do during these days? There's true feasting. There's true excess. There is spending of money. Mm-hmm. All of these things which are diametrically opposed to this sort of Ben Franklin demonic spirit of capitalism. And where you actually give for charity. You actually do all these things.
And the feast days pointed to something that's like, this is nice.
You can, and that's the beautiful thing. You can truly feast. You can truly indulge in this excess because you trust in God and what he has done for you.
And knowing that because God loves you, he does give you gifts to enjoy.
And these festivals are a foretaste of what we are going to experience in heaven. That when we stop our work, when we feast these ways, when we stop it, and that's the thing, just stop it, right? Just stop working. Stop it. Why? Because God's going to take care of it. Doing nothing requires a lot of trust.
That's true.
Doing nothing requires a lot of trust that God is actually going to preserve you. And this is one of the evilest things that's happened, especially around Thanksgiving, because now they've got stores open on Thanksgiving Day itself. It's no longer a feast day even. So this is why I'm all about hashtag bring back the feast days or bring back the holidays. Come up with a catchy slogan there, Peter, for that.
In fact, not only we should, if you come up with a slogan, but also we need a meme for this, don't you think?
I think we need a meme.
Well, that's not me that you have to talk to then.
What is that, David, the assistant
The
to the
associate
assistant?
producer.
Right.
Right.
And the way that has to happen is we have to, because we rarely actually talk to our associate producer, so we talk to her through the episode. So, Hannah, if you could let your associate producer, David, put a meme together about bringing the festivals back.
So that would be
I
awesome.
want my festival.
Exact. There we go. And frankly, the pastoral office is the last leisure class we have. This was my last point that I wanted to bring up about leisure. And what do I mean by that? That we are the last last calling where we are to sit and think. We are to sit and contemplate these things. It is part of our duty to read. It's part of our duty to think. It's part of our duty to study. And
I know
And this-
I joke about this. I do actually think a lot.
no, I completely, but you would be surprised at how many pastors I've run into where they feel guilty. They feel guilty because they picked up a book and started reading it. Because they have been influenced by the world that, if I'm not running and doing this, or if I'm not doing that, or if I'm not doing this, then I am not earning my keep or whatever. But pastors, it is your duty to read. It is your duty to study.
And also, behind the collar moment, not necessarily me, because it might interfere with my clanging and banging, but this is why I think a lot of pastors smoke.
Yeah.
Is because that is a very contemplative thing.
Right.
I mean, actually, I'll be honest, I thought of getting a vicar way back when. It was just an odd thing. It's not like I've been thinking about someday I'll be a vicarage supervisor or something. We'll get a vicar. I was thinking, I was on a late night walk with a cigar, and I was like, yeah, it might be a good idea.
Right. Well, because it gets you out, it gets you away from other people. Mm-hmm. And it is a socially acceptable way to get away from people. Frankly, that's what it is. And I think one of our problems is now with technology, we are so darn connected to everybody and everything that as soon as the phone rings, we are out. If we did try to set aside that time for contemplation, for thinking, for leisure, it's taken away from us.
Right. Because if you have a lot of small kids, like the only place is the toilet, and even that.
And even that is suspect.
No, it's not.
If these little ones are fast enough, they'll get in there.
Not lately at your house, Vicar.
No.
So, the pastor is the last leisure class, and we need to recover that. That all the other leisure classes, like the nobility, the aristocracy, the sort of landed gentry, all of that has kind of gone away. It has been transformed. This sort of idea of being able to think and to contemplate and to learn and to have this leisure, that's all gone. I mean,
I wonder, for example, in the medical field, how much time a doctor has when he's between patients to look at the latest research, to read medical journals.
yeah, isn't it sad that we actually have to give people time for professional development? Like, we actually have to mandate it. We have to mandate, you got to go on and do more stuff, rather than trusting that they're actually going to continue to study because they actually have the time to do it. This is the problem. We are so overworked that now we have to say, you got to leave for a few days because otherwise there's no other time to learn. It's the same with teachers. It's the same with doctors. And they've even started to do it with the pastoral office. You've got all of these, what is it called?
A Gottesdienst?
No, not so much. not so much the conferences, but the continuing ed courses that are
Yeah.
held throughout our district and throughout the United States, where you can get like credit, like continuing education credit for it.
I
And
have,
it's like-
I have so little of those.
Well,
I know we're supposed
and-
to keep up on those.
But you see, that's the problem, right? The problem is that they're thinking that we're all so busy that they actually have to mandate it. They have to make it a law for us to actually do our job. To actually do this part of the job that we should just do anyway.
Right.
It's like buying somebody an iron lung when they should be breathing on their own. And this is a degeneration in us. This is a degeneration in our culture, in our people, even in the pastoral office. Because, like I said, this is our duty. This is our job. This is what we ought to be doing. And if we don't have the time for leisure, if we are that busy, then either we need to learn how to organize our days better, or we need to get over ourselves and not be so arrogant, because the church won't fall apart because we take some time every day to read.
Berg, what would be helpful for members? Say we got parishioners, they want to help and they support their pastor. How do you think they can help their pastor with this?
One way that they can help their pastor through this, and this would probably be the first steps to do it, is be very supportive of him going to conferences. Be very supportive of him, because some of us, when you're not used to this sort of thing, you need to just get away.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think what happens for pastors who need to, in a way, get away, one of the reasons why they don't is because it costs money.
Right. So there's financial support that you can give him, so that way he can go and do conferences and that sort
And
of
you
stuff.
you almost have to earmark it.
You do.
If you
Earmark
say
it in the budget.
yeah, or you have to say, okay, because if we're talking about leisure and getting away and all those things, if you just say here's some money, we'll find all sorts of other places
To put it.
You have to say, no, this is for.
Yep. Or
Get
this
away.
is for books. Or this
Right.
is for this. Another thing that you can do is don't tie him to the church building with office hours. And what I mean by that is let him be free to go and study at a coffee shop. The third thing to do is don't get upset if he doesn't respond to your text right away. And pastors, this is something you should do, is put your phone in a different room, because phones are distracting. Phones are very distracting. They've done studies that even if your phone is in your pocket, you've got a part of your mind that's always concentrating on that phone. So you need to just get away from it all.
It's happened to me several times the last couple of weeks where my phone was out of power.
Mm-hmm.
I have no idea how long it's been out of power. And I haven't gotten any text or calls today. It's been kind of nice.
It's nice, right? It is.
Does that surprise you, Pete?
No phone. I just want to be alone today.
Yes, that is a throwback to Cake, our favorite musical group.
Nice. But so those are some of the suggestions that I have. Just try to give your pastor some time and
encourage him to do that.
And encourage him to do that. That he doesn't have to, and if he feels guilty about taking the time, you tell him that it's his job to do that.
There have been times where my elders have said, "Hey, pastor, you should
get out of here."
Yeah. No, there was one summer it was just where I had a vacation scheduled and I had there's no way I could have taken it.
Right.
Something happened where people needed me.
And stuff like that happens. And this is why too, be very supportive and help them to get away, because pastors need to get away. They need to see their families. They need to take a step back from all this.
Right.
So then hopefully they'll come back.
Because you do know, when we do come back, we have a renewed vigor for what we do.
Right.
Because even if we're, somewhere else, like if I'm on relaxing on a beach or something like that, it's not like I'm just forgetting everything.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just in a relaxed way thinking about sometimes how I could do things better.
Oh, and here's the other final thing. Speaking of vacations, give them bigger blocks of time for vacation, because it takes you about 3 days to wind down, and then you start winding up about 3 days getting ready to come back, which if you're only taking a week of vacation, there's really no downtime, you know? You don't really get that effect.
Right.
So, bigger blocks of time.
Unless you have 5 children, then
Then you never wind down.
Yeah, that'd be true.
So, all right, I think our producer is, he's saying wrap it up. So
he looks
we
pretty
are-
sleepy. How long have you been awake? How many hours?
Oh, 19.
It's after 12, and it's after noon, and he got off his shift at 7 this morning. So yeah.
So, all right. Thank you for listening to the show. I'm Berg.
I'm Bollhagen,
I'm Vicar.
and may your ...
Thank you for joining us. This podcast is available on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts. Questions, thoughts, concerns? You can contact us on Facebook at facebook.com/Clerical Errors Podcast, on Twitter at Clerical Errors P for podcast, or email us at feedback@clericalerrors.org. Thanks for listening to Clerical Errors. See you next time.